The persistent enigma of self-sabotage, that counterintuitive dance where we become the architects of our own undoing, often prompts superficial diagnoses in our fast-paced, solution-oriented culture. We're told it's a lack of willpower, a flaw in character, or a failure to optimize. Yet, what if these repeated stumbles, these moments where aspiration crumbles under the weight of inexplicable self-defeat, are not products of present inadequacy but rather echoes from a more distant, formative past? The provocative assertion that the roots of adult self-sabotage lie entwined within the experiences of childhood, a central tenet explored by Sigmund Freud, challenges us to look beyond the immediate symptom and embark on a deeper archaeological dig into the psyche's foundational layers. Freud's groundbreaking work posited that the seemingly irrational ways we obstruct our own happiness and success are often replays of unresolved dramas, unmet needs, and unhealed wounds from our earliest years. This perspective invites a courageous, if unsettling, journey into the unconscious, suggesting that the scripts dictating our self-defeating patterns were drafted long before we could consciously wield the pen. To understand why we trip ourselves up on the path to fulfillment, we must dare to revisit the nursery, not to assign blame, but to reclaim authorship over our lives. Freud's revolutionary cartography of the mind introduced the unconscious as a vast, dynamic realm, powerfully shaped by early life and exerting a profound, often unseen, influence on adult behavior. This psychic underworld, populated by repressed desires, anxieties, and forgotten memories from infancy and childhood, doesn't remain dormant. Instead, it actively seeks expression, often manifesting in perplexing behaviors that defy conscious logic yet serve a hidden, archaic agenda. The psychoanalytic lens suggests that self-sabotage is frequently a symptom of these subterranean conflicts. For instance, the child who experienced love as conditional upon suppression of their true self might, as an adult, unconsciously sabotage relationships or career opportunities where authenticity and visibility are required, fearing a repetition of early rejection or overwhelm. The promise of success, consciously desired, might trigger deep-seated anxieties, perhaps a fear of outshining a caregiver or sibling, learned in the crucible of early family dynamics, leading to procrastination or uncharacteristic errors that ensure that danger is averted. Crucial to this understanding are Freud's psychosexual stages, which, beyond their literal interpretations, highlight how early relational experiences and the navigation of developmental tasks leave lasting imprints. Fixation, a psychic stuckness due to unresolved conflicts in a particular stage, can predispose individuals to specific forms of self-sabotage. Someone with unresolved oral needs, perhaps stemming from inconsistent early nurturing, might later sabotage relationships through excessive dependency or, conversely, an inability to trust, thereby ensuring their early experience of unreliable care is perpetually reconfirmed. Similarly, issues around control and autonomy from the anal stage might manifest as crippling perfectionism that paralyzes action, or a rebellious disorganization that undermines goals. The Oedipus complex, metaphorically representing the child's negotiation of love, rivalry, and identification within the primary family triangle, can, if unresolved, lead to adult patterns of competing with authority figures or choosing partners who replicate parental dynamics, thereby sabotaging genuine professional growth or intimate connection. These aren't choices made in a vacuum, but reenactments of old scripts. To manage the anxiety from these unconscious conflicts, the ego deploys defense mechanisms, unconscious strategies that distort reality to protect against psychic pain. While adaptive in childhood, these mechanisms, when rigidly carried into adulthood, become the very tools of self-sabotage. Repression pushes disturbing material into the unconscious, but these elements fester, fueling anxieties or leading to Freudian slips that betray hidden intentions. Denial allows one to ignore painful realities, preventing necessary action, such as leaving a toxic job or relationship. Projection, attributing one's own unacceptable impulses to others, can alienate support systems, as an insecure individual perceives constant criticism where none exists. These defenses, designed to shield, ultimately blind us to the true nature of our struggles, keeping us locked in cycles of reacting to the past rather than responding to the present, ensuring that childhood wounds dictate adult outcomes in a tragic feedback loop of self-inflicted limitations. The historical lineage of understanding self-destructive behavior traces back long before Freud, often invoking moral failing or external malevolence. Freud's pivotal contribution was to internalize these demons, locating their origins within the individual's own developmental history, specifically the unprocessed experiences of childhood. This humanized such struggles, reframing them not as inherent flaws but as understandable, albeit painful, adaptations to early environments. Post-Freudian thinkers, while diverging on specifics, broadly reinforced this emphasis. Melanie Klein explored the infant's earliest object relations and primitive anxieties, suggesting how these could lay groundwork for later self-undermining patterns. John Bowlby's attachment theory empirically demonstrated how early bonding experiences create internal working models that shape expectations and behaviors in future relationships, with insecure attachment styles often correlating with sabotaging behaviors in intimacy. The common thread is the profound and lasting impact of the early relational matrix. The hidden dynamic perpetuating these patterns is often the repetition compulsion, an unconscious drive to reenact early traumatic situations or unresolved conflicts, not from a desire for pain, but in a misguided attempt to achieve mastery or a different outcome. A child who felt unseen might unconsciously seek out partners or bosses who similarly ignore them, not because they enjoy neglect, but because the familiarity is strangely comforting, or because there's a desperate, unconscious hope that, this time, I'll make them see me. This inevitably leads to re-experiencing the original hurt, a core mechanism of self-sabotage. Imagine Sarah, a talented artist who consistently fails to promote her work. This might stem from a childhood where her creative expressions were subtly dismissed by a pragmatic parent, leading her to internalize the belief that her art, and by extension, herself, isn't valuable. Her self-sabotage, not seeking opportunities, protects her from potential rejection, thereby reconfirming her childhood-derived script. The subtle, chronic traumas of childhood, emotional neglect, persistent criticism, or the weight of overwhelming parental expectations, are often more insidious in fostering self-sabotage than overt abuse, precisely because their effects can be harder to identify and articulate. A child whose emotional landscape is consistently invalidated learns that their inner world is unimportant or wrong. This can cultivate a core belief of unworthiness, a silent saboteur whispering that happiness or success is undeserved, leading to unconscious maneuvers that ensure these outcomes are never fully realized. They might abandon projects just before completion, pick fights in otherwise stable relationships, or miss crucial opportunities, all seemingly by accident, yet all serving to confirm their deeply ingrained sense of not being good enough. These are not conscious choices but the tragic outcomes of an internal environment shaped by early deprivation or invalidation. In response to such challenging beginnings, a false self, as described by D.W. Winnicott, may develop, a compliant or high-achieving persona designed to secure approval or avoid pain, while the true self, with its authentic feelings and desires, remains hidden. In adulthood, living through this false self can lead to a profound sense of emptiness and inauthenticity. Self-sabotage can then emerge as an unconscious rebellion of the suppressed true self, or from the false self's inability to navigate situations requiring genuine vulnerability. Someone who built a false self of competence to please demanding parents might sabotage their career when it demands more than mere performance, when it calls for passion or risk that feels alien to the constructed persona. Their downfall, paradoxically, might be a desperate, albeit dysfunctional, attempt to break free or signal distress. Furthermore, a harshly punitive superego, internalized from critical caregivers, acts as a relentless inner critic. This internal persecutor scrutinizes and condemns, ensuring that any movement towards joy or achievement is met with guilt or shame. "You'll fail anyway," it whispers, and the individual may unconsciously arrange circumstances to prove it right, engaging in preemptive self-punishment to appease this internal tyrant, thereby sabotaging any chance of genuine, sustained fulfillment. One of the most insidious aspects of childhood-rooted self-sabotage is how these patterns become so deeply woven into the fabric of one's being that they feel natural or inevitable. "I'm just not a relationship person," or "I always mess things up when they're going well." These pronouncements are often delivered with a sigh of resignation, as if describing an immutable law of personal physics. This sense of inherent characteristic arises because these scripts were written during formative years when the child's understanding of self and world was being cast. If early life was characterized by instability or criticism, then stability and praise in adulthood can feel profoundly unsettling, even threatening. The psyche, striving for a perverse kind of consistency, may unconsciously steer towards familiar, even if painful, emotional terrain, preferring the devil you know of self-sabotage to the alien landscape of success or secure attachment. This isn't a conscious desire for pain, but an unconscious adherence to the known, a way to maintain a sense of identity, however limiting. The hidden dynamic that maintains the power of these self-sabotaging patterns, disguising them as inherent traits, often involves the powerful drive to confirm early formed core beliefs. When an adult experience contradicts a negative childhood-derived belief, e.g., "I am unlovable," it creates cognitive dissonance. To resolve this tension, the individual might unconsciously engage in behaviors that sabotage the positive experience, thereby proving the old, familiar belief true. Imagine if 70% of those who experienced profound early neglect reported an almost visceral discomfort with unsolicited kindness in adulthood. This isn't ingratitude, it's the psyche struggling to reconcile new, positive data with an old, deeply entrenched negative self-schema. The unconscious logic might be, if I am fundamentally flawed, this positive attention must be a mistake or insincere. I must act in a way that reveals my true unworthiness. This drive to validate the childhood script is potent because these early beliefs are fused with one's identity. Challenging them feels like challenging one's very existence. Consider Michael, a manager who excels at his job but always deflects praise and micromanages his team to the point of alienating them, thereby ensuring projects are more stressful and less successful than they could be. He describes himself as just a worrier and detail-oriented. A Freudian perspective might suggest Michael grew up with an anxious, controlling parent, learning that love and safety were contingent on vigilance and anticipating problems. His natural management style is, in fact, a replay of this early dynamic, sabotaging team morale and his own peace of mind to maintain a familiar, albeit stressful, sense of control and to ward off an unconsciously anticipated catastrophe, proving, in a twisted way, that his hypervigilance is necessary. The impact of childhood-rooted self-sabotage on individual autonomy is profound. Autonomy, the capacity for self-governance and authentic choice, is severely compromised when unconscious scripts dictate behavior. The individual often feels like a puppet, pulled by invisible strings towards outcomes they consciously abhor. This internal battle erodes agency, a feeling that often originates in early environments where a child's attempts at self-expression or independence were stifled. If asserting one's needs led to punishment or withdrawal of love, the child learns to suppress their authentic self, a pattern that readily translates into adult passivity or self-defeating rebellion, undermining the ability to set boundaries, pursue goals, or trust one's own judgment. The "I can't" of adulthood is often the echo of a childhood "you shouldn't." The hidden dynamic sustaining this loss of autonomy is the internalization of external constraints. The critical parent or neglectful environment becomes an internal psychic structure, like Freud's harsh superego, which continues to police and undermine long after the original figures are gone. This internal saboteur generates anxiety or guilt at the prospect of authentic success or happiness, effectively ensuring the individual remains confined by past limitations. When such diminished autonomy is widespread, it can contribute to collective self-sabotage, where communities or societies enact self-limiting beliefs and behaviors, perhaps failing to address systemic problems due to a shared, historically conditioned sense of powerlessness or ingrained distrust, thereby perpetuating cycles of disadvantage. Consider Maria, who repeatedly enters relationships with emotionally unavailable partners, despite consciously craving intimacy. This pattern might stem from an early attachment to a caregiver who was physically present but emotionally distant. Her choice of partners, while painful, feels familiar and unconsciously safe because it doesn't challenge her deeply ingrained model of relationships. This sabotages her desire for genuine connection, severely limiting her relational autonomy and perpetuating a cycle of disappointment. Collectively, imagine a community that consistently votes against measures that would bring long-term economic benefit, perhaps due to a deep-seated, historically rooted suspicion of outsiders or a fear of change passed down through generations, thereby sabotaging its own potential for growth. Dismantling the entrenched patterns of self-sabotage requires more than willpower. It necessitates a journey into the unconscious, a core tenet of the Freudian approach. The primary strategy is to make the unconscious conscious. This often begins in the therapeutic relationship, a confidential space where repressed memories, unacknowledged emotions, and repetitive, self-defeating patterns can be safely explored and understood. The goal is not to dwell endlessly on the past or to assign blame, but to illuminate how past experiences have shaped present realities, thereby loosening their deterministic grip. The therapist-client relationship itself can become a corrective emotional experience. For someone whose early relationships were damaging, a consistent, empathetic, and non-judgmental therapist provides a new model for relating, a secure base from which to explore vulnerability and reprocess old wounds. Freud's concept of working through is central, a gradual, repetitive process of confronting and reinterpreting unconscious conflicts as they manifest in therapy and daily life. This emotional re-education allows the ego to develop healthier coping mechanisms and to integrate disowned aspects of the self, gradually replacing the harsh, sabotaging inner critic with a more compassionate and realistic internal voice. Beyond psychoanalysis, cognitive behavioral therapy, CBT, offers tools to identify and challenge the negative thought patterns and core beliefs that fuel self-sabotage, often originating from those early experiences Freud highlighted. Mindfulness practices can cultivate moment-to-moment awareness, helping to catch self-sabotaging impulses before they gain momentum. Developing self-compassion, treating oneself with kindness during struggles, directly counters the internalized critic. The case of David, who consistently procrastinates on important life goals, illustrates this. Perhaps David's procrastination stems from an unconscious fear of failure, rooted in a childhood where his efforts were harshly judged by a perfectionistic parent. In therapy, David might uncover this link, realizing his inaction is not laziness but a protective, albeit maladaptive, strategy. He might then work on recognizing the critical inner voice, challenging its pronouncements, and taking small, manageable steps towards his goals, tolerating the anxiety with newfound understanding and self-support. This gradual process of insight, emotional processing, and behavioral change allows him to dismantle the self-sabotaging pattern and begin to build a life aligned with his conscious desires, rather than his childhood fears. The strategies, therefore, are multi-layered, moving from deep unconscious exploration to practical behavioral change. In conclusion, the assertion that the roots of much adult self-sabotage lie in childhood, as illuminated by Freud and subsequent psychological inquiry, offers not a deterministic sentence but a profound pathway to liberation. It reframes perplexing self-defeat not as a sign of inherent flaw, but as an understandable, albeit painful, legacy of early experiences. Recognizing these deeply ingrained patterns, how they masquerade as natural, how they erode autonomy, and how they were forged in the crucible of our formative years, is the first, most crucial step towards change. The unconscious scripts, penned in vulnerability, need not dictate the entire play of our lives. The journey to redefine our relationship with these self-sabotaging tendencies is one of courageous self-excavation and compassionate understanding. It involves acknowledging the power of the past without being imprisoned by it. We cannot alter history, but we can transform its meaning and its influence over our present and future. This change now is an invitation to an ongoing commitment, to self-awareness, to healing the echoes of the child within, and to consciously choosing new behaviors that align with our adult aspirations. By understanding the why rooted in childhood, we can begin to dismantle the mechanisms of self-sabotage, reclaiming our agency and rewriting our narratives from a place of greater wisdom and inner freedom. This individual transformation, in turn, can ripple outwards, fostering healthier relationships and more conscious communities, breaking cycles of unconsciously transmitted pain. The power to compose a new life symphony, one less encumbered by the melancholic refrains of the past, emerges from this very understanding and the brave decision to engage with its depths.